Hello and welcome to this video. This is Bach's Organization of Tempos in the Well-Tempered Clavier Book 1, and we will be covering all 24 of the Preludes and Fugues from Book 1 of the Well-Tempered Clavier. And this is from a chapter from my book in progress titled Discovering Bach's Secret Tempo Code. I'm going to scroll down here. I have links below this video to where you can read more about this and other chapters in my book in progress. Okay, so we have here these various little spreadsheet charts here, and I have this for every one of the Preludes and Fugues. We'll go through this pretty quickly, so if you have any questions or concerns, I would encourage you to go and read this, and you'll have more time to scroll through it and think about things rather than digesting it all right now during this video. So if you're familiar with my theory of tempo in the music of Bach, you now know that these numbers here represent the duration ratio between the movements. This particular case here in the fugue, Prelude and Fugue in C major, this is the first interpretation. I'll tell you about the second one in a minute. In the first interpretation, which I believe is the correct one, as I speak right now. In the first interpretation here, you can see that Bach has 35 measures for the prelude, 27 measures for the fugue. They're both in 4/4 time, performed at this tempo with 35 measures. The prelude lasts exactly 2 minutes and 13 seconds. I even rounded off to the nearest hundredth of a second here just to be very accurate. And in the fugue, when performed at this tempo with 27 measures, it lasts 2 minutes and 15 seconds. So you can easily see that when played at this tempo and at this tempo, the prelude and fugue are virtually equal in duration. These figures here are these rounded off, and these are what provides that duration ratio here. That shows it exactly, and then these are the margins of error. So if it's not rounded off, if it stays the same, it's 0%. If it's a little different, like the difference between 215 and 213.33 is 1.2%. If you're wondering about that, go and view some former videos on this topic, and that will explain it to you. Now let's move on to the interpretation number 2. Actually, for many years, I believed this to be the plan that Bach intended for the first Prelude and Fugue in C major, but through many years of reflecting on that and re-evaluating that, I've actually come to the conclusion that these tempos are just a little too fast. So instead of 72 and 54, I just went down to 63 and 48. It's just a little bit slower. It's the next slowest speed in the tempo matrix that I take these tempos from. These tempos, by the way, are the natural tempos for the work, whichever work we're on. Prelude and Fugue in C minor. The C minor prelude consists of 4 sections. The first section, the longest, 27 measures of 4/4. And we have a presto, 6 measures of a presto. We have 1 measure of an adagio and 4 measures back to the original allegro from the beginning. Assigning the standard allegro tempo for Bach, which was 84, a presto a little faster, an adagio measured by the 16th note. This goes way down. You're subdividing that and then returning to the original tempo here for the last section. You know, I was astonished when I discovered this. I was actually astonished when I added these up. When you add up all these durations that result from these tempos, the prelude comes to 1 minute and 58 seconds. And when performed at this tempo with this number of measures, the fugue lasts also 1 minute and 58 seconds. It's really astonishing. If you round these off to 2 minutes, you can see a 1:1 duration ratio of 2 minutes for the Prelude and Fugue in C minor. 2 minutes each. Very nice, neat, and orderly like that. Next, we have Prelude and Fugue in C sharp major, and performed at this tempo with this number of measures. The prelude lasts 1 minute and 26 seconds. With this many measures performed at this tempo, the fugue lasts 3 minutes and 3 seconds. By the way, you probably noticed these tempos are the same. So the dotted quarter of the prelude equals the quarter note of the fugue. Look at the number of measures that Bach wrote, 104 and 55. You notice how it's almost at a 2-to-1 ratio? So if we round this off, if we bring this up to 108, that brings us to 130, because if performed at this tempo with 108 measures, it lasts 1.5 minutes. Margin of error is 3.7. Then if we simply take the fugue and take those 55 measures and round it down 1 measure to 54, you have a perfect 2-to-1 measure ratio. And then you have also, if you total up the number of beats, so this is 108 beats, and this would be 54 times 4 beats, which is 216. So you would have the beat ratio, actually I'd say here the beat ratio is 1-to-2. So whenever you have a 1-to-2 beat ratio and the tempos are the same, you automatically have a 1-to-2 duration ratio here. 130, 3 minutes. A nice even 3 minutes for that fugue. Very interesting. Now let's move on to Prelude and Fugue in C sharp minor. In this example here, this number of measures, 39, played at this tempo, lasts 2 minutes and 26 seconds, almost 2:30. So if we just bring that up to 40 measures, we have 2.5 minutes. The fugue, 115 measures, played at this tempo here, lasts 4 minutes and 48 seconds. It's just a little bit shy of 5 minutes with a 4% margin of error. That's a pretty large one, but he was only 5 measures off here. But what's very interesting is that when you look at the actual durations here, that you almost have, he almost achieved it right here. So you don't even have to round them off. 226 is virtually half of 448. If you just round them off, you can see, generally speaking, we have a 235. And we're going to see another 235 in a later prelude and fugue. So remember that here. So now we go to the Prelude and Fugue in D major, played at this tempo with this number of measures. The prelude lasts 1 minute and 56 seconds. Round that off to 2 minutes. We have 27 measures of the fugue performed at that tempo, lasts 2 minutes. So you can see that in this one, Bach planned 2 minutes equal for both prelude and fugue. And he did that, as he always did, by his combination of the numbers of measures and beats produced by those measures and the ratio of tempos. So it was all a matter of manipulating the number of measures in order to combine with the tempos to create a certain duration, or 2 durations in this case, like in the Prelude and Fugue. So we have 2 equal durations of 2 minutes. Well, Prelude and Fugue in D minor, almost the same, but just a little longer. You see that 26 measures of played at this tempo here. The prelude lasts exactly 2 minutes and 10 seconds. Well, with this number of measures played at this tempo, the fugue lasts 2 minutes and 5 seconds. You can see an only 5-second difference here. If you just round them off to 210, I'm assuming that Bach composed the prelude first and then based the length of the fugue from that. So seen from that perspective, then we can take 210 is the the set duration, and then this one is derived from that. So he was 3.3% off from that. So to make a long story short here, Prelude and Fugue in D minor both have durations of 2 minutes and 10 seconds, a little over 2 minutes each. Prelude and Fugue in E flat major. Look at the number of measures that Bach wrote. He has 70 and 37, and they're both in the same meter or time signature. Do you notice that 37 is almost exactly half of 70? So this number of measures played at this tempo lasts 5 minutes and 50 seconds. Rounding it off to 72 measures, we have an even 6 minutes. The fugue is faster. It's a nice slow prelude and a faster fugue. So 37 measures played at this tempo here last 2 minutes and 3 seconds. If we simply round that off to 2 minutes by subtracting one of these measures to 36, we have 2 minutes, and we have a 3-to-1 duration ratio between 6 minutes and 2 minutes. And you see here, 72 measures, 36 measures. So I believe that Bach's original plan for this was to achieve 72 and 36 measures in order to achieve 6 minutes and 2 minutes for this when performed at these tempos. And as I've said in previous videos, that Bach did this by planning his tempos first. He actually planned these first before he composed the Prelude and Fugue, and then he figured out how long he wanted the Prelude and Fugue, and then he based the number of measures from that. So it's almost like he composed backwards. Prelude and Fugue in E flat minor. This number of measures played at this tempo lasts 320. This number of measures played at this tempo lasts 626. If you round 320 off to 315 by taking one measure away, and then this one, it's not even one measure different. It's just 3/4 of a measure more. So if you just add 3/4 of a measure more to that, you get 630. So you have 315, 630, 1-to-2 duration ratio for the E flat minor Prelude and Fugue. Prelude and Fugue in E major. 24 measures played at this tempo last 1 minute and 30 seconds, exactly 1.5 minutes. 29 measures played at this tempo last 1 minute and 36 seconds. Round that off to 130. So you can see that I think it is clear that in Bach's planning of this particular Prelude and Fugue, that he planned 27 measures for the fugue, but he attained 29. So this was planned, this was achieved. Planned, achieved. And the ultimate result was equal durations at 1.5 minutes, with the exception, of course, of a little 6-minute discrepancy for the fugue. Prelude and Fugue in E minor. Well, remember back the Prelude and Fugue in C minor, how all the sections added to 2 minutes? Well, here, the prelude consists of 2 sections, one slower, one faster. And the faster section, presto, is actually 2 times faster than the prelude. That's what Bach meant by presto in this case. He didn't mean as fast as possible, but he meant 2 times faster than the prelude. So if the prelude is played at this tempo and the presto is 2 times faster than that, look what happens. The duration of the first section of the prelude is 2 minutes and 5 seconds. The duration of the second section of the prelude is 54 seconds. So you can see it is pretty clear that Bach was aiming for 21 measures in each. See how he has 22 and 19? So he was aiming for that, ideally. He didn't achieve it perfectly, but he went 1 measure over here and he went 2 measures under here, which automatically created a total duration of 3 minutes. So its ideal plan was to have a 2 minutes plus 1 minute is 3 minutes for the prelude. And then the fugue played with this number of measures, played at this tempo, lasts 1.5 minutes. So you can see that Prelude and Fugue in E minor, 2-to-1 duration ratio, 3 minutes, 1:30. We've seen several of those already. or at least a few of them already, 3 minutes and 1:30. Prelude and Fugue in F major, played at this tempo, this number of measures, lasts a minute and a half. Played this number of measures, played at this tempo, lasts a minute and a half. Easily a 1:1 duration ratio. This is actually the only, I believe, the only prelude and fugue, one of the only prelude and fugues that have the exact same tempo and almost identical meters. So we have 12/8, 3/8. It's basically the same, except there's 4 beats in a measure here, and these are the same. That's not often the case. Bach did not do that very often, but that's a pretty easy one here. Prelude and Fugue in F minor. So we have this number of measures, this tempo lasts 2:26, rounded off to 2:30. This number of measures played at this tempo lasts 4 minutes and 50 seconds. Round that off to 5 minutes, and you have a 1:2 duration ratio again. Remember the C sharp minor prelude and fugue up above a couple minutes ago? That was a 2:35. This is also a 2:35, 1:2 duration ratio. But what's really interesting here is that Bach achieved a 1:2 ratio almost, well, virtually precisely, simply not even rounding it off. So you see that if you take 2:26 and you double that, you actually almost have 450. See, so he came very, very close to doing that anyway without even having to round it off. Next, we have Prelude and Fugue in F sharp major. This number of measures played at this tempo lasts a minute and 25 seconds, rounded off to 1:30. 35 measures played at this tempo last 2 minutes and 55 seconds. Round that off to 3 minutes, and you have another 1:30 to 3, 1:2 ratio. Prelude and Fugue in F sharp minor. This number of measures played at this tempo lasts 1 minute and 31 seconds. And the fugue with this number of measures played at this tempo lasts 2 minutes and 51 seconds. You round that off to 3. So in order to round this off to 3, we have to add 2 more measures onto there, 42, which is what I believe Bach planned from the outset. So when he was planning this prelude and fugue, he said, okay, I want to make this a 1:2 ratio. I want to make the fugue 2 times longer than the prelude. I want the fugue to be 3 minutes, and I want the prelude to be 1 minute and a half. In so doing, he most likely planned 42 measures for the fugue originally, but was able to only attain 40 in actual practice. You can see that playing musical detective, we can figure out that Bach most likely wanted this 1:2 ratio here, 1:30 to 3. Prelude and Fugue in G major. Similar kind of thing, but a little longer. This tempo or this number of measures in this tempo lasts a minute and 11 seconds. This number of measures at this tempo lasts 3 minutes and 35 seconds. Well, you can see that it's almost an exact 1:3 ratio here. So rounding off to 110, rounding off to 330, we see a perfect 1:3 ratio with very low margins of error here. Prelude and Fugue in G minor. This number of measures played at this tempo lasts 2 minutes and 6 seconds. This number of measures played at this tempo lasts 2 minutes and 9 seconds. So we only see a 3-second difference. I'm assuming that Bach composed the prelude first and then planned the fugue from that. So if we take 206 and don't round it off to 2, as we normally would, then you can see that Bach was very close, really close to achieving equal durations in the Prelude and Fugue in G minor. So he probably originally planned 2 minutes for both, but went over 2 minutes in the first one, and then likewise went over in this one to keep them very close. So Prelude and Fugue in G minor both have durations of about 2 minutes and 6 seconds. Prelude and Fugue in A flat major. This number of measures played at this tempo lasts 1 minute and 34 seconds. This number of measures played at this tempo, the fugue lasts 2 minutes and 54 seconds, or actually 255 if you round that off. So if you round 255 off to 3, and you round 134 off to 130, we have yet again another 130 to 3, 1 to 2 duration ratio. I believe that Bach planned these numbers of measures. Before he wrote this prelude and fugue, he told himself, okay, I want the prelude to have this many measures, so when performed at this tempo, it lasts 1.5 minutes. When the fugue has this many measures played at this tempo, it lasts 3 minutes. And then Bach composed this prelude and fugue to try to achieve that, but in actual practice, he went 2 minutes or 2 measures over for that, and he went 1 measure under for that. Prelude and fugue in G sharp minor. So we can see here, you sort of get the picture here. So yet again, a 130 to 2, 1 to 2 duration ratio. Just going to speed it up here a little bit so we can get through these. Prelude and fugue in A major. Yet one more time, we have a 130 and a 3, 1 to 2 duration ratio. This tells me that Bach probably planned 56 measures for the fugue to attain 3 minutes, but in actual practice, attained 54 measures. Prelude and fugue in A minor. This is an interesting one. It has the longest fugue in all of the Well-Tempered Clavier Book 1. I think maybe even the longest out of both books. I'm not certain yet about that. With 28 measures played at this tempo, the prelude lasts 1 minute and 45 seconds. When played at this tempo with this number of measures, the fugue lasts 7 minutes and 15 seconds. If you round this off to 7 and keep that as is, you have a 1 to 4 duration ratio. This is actually one of the only 1 to 4 duration ratios in Bach's works that I could find. Usually it's pretty lopsided to have a really short prelude and such a long fugue. Usually he planned either 1-1 or 1-2 duration ratios, at least in Book 1 of the Well-Tempered Clavier. So I believe that Bach's original plan for this fugue was to have 84 measures in it, because with 84 measures at this tempo, this fugue lasts exactly 7 minutes. And he derived that, he figured that out from the prelude. So he had the prelude done, and then he figured out how many measures does he have to have for the fugue to make it 4 times longer than the prelude. And that he achieved very well with only a 3.6% margin of error for the fugue. Prelude and fugue in B flat major. So we have 154 rounded off to 2. The fugue is perfect. This number of measures, this tempo, results in 2 minutes. We didn't have to round that off. And we see an easy 1-to-1 duration ratio for the prelude and fugue in B flat major, both 2 minutes long. Prelude and fugue in B flat minor. Well, this is a little bit different, but similar in a way. We see 3:02 for the prelude, 3:07 for the fugue. Round those off to 3 minutes, and you see a nice, convenient relationship of 3 minutes each for the prelude and fugue in B flat minor. Prelude and fugue in B major. This number of measures, this tempo, you last 124. Let's not round that off yet, though, because let's look at what happens with the fugue. The fugue, this number of measures played at this tempo, lasts 2 minutes and 50 seconds. So it's tempting to want to round that off to 130 and 3 again, but Bach did even better than that this time. He actually achieved virtually precisely, with no margin of error, 0.6% margin of error there. Look, if you take 124 and double it, you get 248, which is very close to 250. So if you just go 125, round that off to 125, keep that as 250, you see a nice 1-to-2 duration ratio of 125, 250. So we don't even have to round those off to 133, but yet this is another example where you can see 130 and 3 in the original plan. And last but not least, the prelude and fugue in B minor. Bach marks the prelude andante, So a nice sort of andante speed here, which was probably the tempo ordinario. It lasts 2 minutes and 59 seconds without repeats. With repeats, of course, it would last 6 minutes. So we round that off to 3. And the fugue played at largo at this nice slow speed here with this number of measures lasts 6 minutes and 20 seconds. So you can see that we have 3 minutes and 6 minutes and 20 seconds. If you round 620 off to 6, you can see that Bach was 4 measures off from attaining his ideal. So I believe when Bach planned this prelude and fugue, he planned the prelude and fugue to have a 1-2 duration ratio of 3 minutes and 6 minutes. He knew exactly the tempos he wanted, and then he planned the tempos, planned the numbers of measures from those tempos. And in the fugue, he was only 4 measures off. So he composed 4 measures too many for the fugue. He wanted to cut it off at 72, but he couldn't. So he composed 76, got as close as he could, and so the duration of the fugue is 6 minutes and 20 seconds. But you can see the original plan of 3 and 6 is 1-2. When you add up all of these duration margins of error here, if you add them all up and divide by 48, you get 2.1%. 2.1% only amounts to 1.2 seconds for every minute of music. So you see that Bach was very accurate with attaining these duration ratios, which means they cannot be coincidental, and it really is a fascinating thing because it tells us the speeds that Bach wanted for his music and for his preludes and fugues. So pretty soon I will be doing an analysis of Book 2 of the Well-Tempered Clavier, and thank you for joining me, and until we meet again.